Welcome to Knead. Today we are making a Westphalian farmer's chair. I need to explain a few special features about the Westphalian farmer's chair before we start with the recipe. It consists of wheat and rye flour and some other things, which I will explain later. But the special thing is, as you can see, it is very nice and fluffy, and it has a light crumb on the side, not a real crust. This is because, for example, at the bakery, this bread is placed closely together in the oven. They bake side by side, and when you take them out, you can break them apart. And in this way, the crumb from the inside is also brought to the side. This is part of the characteristic of this bread. It really tastes very, very good. Now, of course, we can't place 5 loaves side by side in the household. And especially with this recipe, which is particularly tailored for very small quantities, you can only bake 1 loaf. There is a trick. The trick is this: you have to imagine the bread now. The dough goes onto the tray, and then I optionally place 2 such ceramic bowls. Next to it, grease the sides here once with butter, let the bread rise, and bake it. The disadvantage of this method is that the ceramic can get very hot, which cannot be controlled precisely. And then there's a crust on the side again, which I don't want. I remedy this by having made a small auxiliary tool. A lathing of 2 strips simply angled, which I attach on the right and left. Beforehand, I put aluminum foil over it, grease it with butter as well, place it here, and put something heavy on top. In this case, I will see later, I simply filled 2 paper bags with dry peas. That's enough to prevent it from being pushed apart. And afterwards, I get a beautiful boat with 2 really nice light sides, as I would like to have it. Additionally, you can also make this bread and dough as a loaf bread. It looks like this. This is a 20 centimeter loaf pan, a completely normal one. I put exactly this amount of dough in there, and it results in a loaf of bread. Then, of course, all that is omitted, but that is then a so-called loaf bread. That is a bit different again. Now I have explained the little peculiarities to you. And now we move on to the recipe. And as we proceed, you can see how I handle it. For the Westphalian farmer's loaf, I use rye flour in my recipe, 1050 wheat flour and 550 wheat flour, yeast, a bit of cream cheese, fresh wheat sourdough, malt, salt, and cold water. For the flour, you can also go ahead and use 812 wheat flour, thus entirely. Then this mixture of the 2 wheat flours is, of course, omitted. This is also described in the recipe. So both options are possible. Since I have a small recipe today, I used my slightly smaller kitchen machine so that everything can be kneaded properly. This corresponds to or suits someone who only has a hand mixer, as they can also make this recipe very, very well by hand. Of course, I start as always by first crumbling the yeast into the bowl. Then comes my cream cheese, which gives the whole texture a wonderful silkiness and softness. And besides, cream cheese in bread can never be wrong. It always tastes good. Then my wheat sourdough is added, if it wants to come out. It already has a certain elasticity, there's no doubt about that. Then I take my flour and work in a bit of malt and salt. Before we mix it now, of course, the cold water goes into the bowl. The thing is stirred a little. It makes mixing easier later. And now comes the flour on top. I always like to put the lid on so it doesn't dust up so much in our kitchen. It's also not entirely unpleasant. So, this is how it looks now. It goes into the machine and is kneaded for about 5 minutes on medium speed. And you will see, it makes a nice dough. I will have to stop the machine once in between, unfortunately due to its size, and scrape the sides a bit because the dough hook doesn't always take everything with it. But that's due to the machine. Maybe you know something like this too. It's not a big deal. You will see what a nice dough it makes in a moment. So the dough is now ready. As you have seen in the machine that I actually only use for experiments, very difficult. But that has to do with the fact that the geometry of the bowl and the geometry of the hook are not ideal. I'm not always happy with the machine, but for this purpose, it works just fine. The dough must all be soft. Very important. Absorb the water well too. It also feels good. That's really nice. Smooth. I'm giving the dough a preliminary structure now. I'm doing this on purpose because I won't be working on it much later and won't need to either. I'm just going to leave it here on the table. And it will have a resting time of almost 45 minutes, which it needs to develop well. Cover it so it doesn't dry out, and in 3/4 of an hour, it will be processed further. See you soon. The dough has now had 45 minutes of resting time. As you can see, it has risen nicely. This dough requires a bit of effort. That means it needs to adhere to resting times to truly develop, so that it is nicely stable in its consistency, but also tastes good. That means we will now take this dough and shape it round once more. And then it will get another 20 minutes to develop. As you can see, this rounding can also be called stretching and folding. You can also press it together like this. I just do it here with the palm of my hand simply because I'm used to it. So I sprinkle a bit more flour underneath. And now I've knocked it back again, as they say. This is good because it can reinforce the structure once more. The entire mechanics that I bring into it and all the strength, let it rest for 20 minutes and then we'll shape it into a loaf of bread. And because it's so simple, I take my bowl again, put the lid back on, and we take another break. So the intermediate resting time is now over. Our dough has risen a bit again. As mentioned, with this bread, it's very important. It develops a great flavor when it gets the necessary dough rest. Now, not much else happens. First of all, I take my baking sheet and will explain shortly what else I'm doing. I'm just going to shape the bread into a long form now. We can see how nicely the dough has risen, how beautifully it forms bubbles. And that's how it should be. Then it's well developed. Through the gluten, and it gives a nice crumb structure as well. That's all there is to it, just to make it a bit longer now. When I roll it to shape it, now I take my baking sheet, place my piece of dough in the middle, and now the previously mentioned supports come into play. As mentioned, these are the two self-made small supports. You can see I've now greased them with butter. I position them with a slight distance of 1 centimeter. You can also use 2, but I'll stick with this. And so that the rising dough doesn't push away the supports. Special equipment, these are 2 paper bags, and they are simply filled with peas. And I just place them on top here to make it a bit heavier. Simply to weigh it down with some weight. This goes straight into the oven. It clings to the sides and prevents the supports from slipping away. I cover it now and it stays like this for a while. 25-30 minutes in the resting phase. Then it goes into the oven. I then make a small slit in the back of the bread with a knife, and then we bake it. You'll see how we do that. See you soon. The farmhouse loaf has now rested for half an hour. I uncover it, and you can already see why I left a bit of space earlier. It has risen beautifully. It now goes into the oven at 215 degrees for 15 minutes. Then I reduce the heat to 180 degrees for 20-25 minutes. At first glance, the bread might seem a bit elaborate. I can promise you the taste and aroma will be wonderful and good. And how long this bread lasts will make up for any effort. So we make a small cut in the back. And now it goes into the oven. See you soon. farmer's bread of the loaf pan. It was exactly 42 minutes in the oven. It's still very hot, so I'm using 2 cloths now. It's well done, as you can hear. Here you can see the structure I mentioned earlier. This is the crumb, completely wonderfully soft. And because of these 2 strips that I attached, it hasn't browned as much here as the crust up here. I put the bread in the oven after I had pressed it with my finger and performed the pressure test. That is very important. And I've brushed it with boiled starch, the so-called paste, as soon as it came out. You could also just use water, then it will shine too. I think it shines more this way. You can make it in several variations. I mentioned it at the beginning, loaf bread, or just, as I call it, fresh. It smells wonderful here. Once again, the bread might seem a bit elaborate at first glance, but it is really worth it. It is incredibly delicious, smells good, and is simply something good for the family. If you enjoyed our video as much as I did, then feel free to send me your suggestions, your ideas, your comments. You can find our recipe, as always, in our video link. And I can only say thank you for watching and see you in 4 weeks at Backleben.